Parker Schnabel had always been known for taking bold steps, but this time even his closest friends thought he had gone too far. He had built a reputation as one of the most determined young miners in the Yukon, a man who could read the land better than any map could. But suddenly, he was gone. No crew, no investors, no production cameras, and no announcement. One day he was working with his team, and the next his name disappeared from every roster. No one knew where he had gone, only that a single new mining lease had been signed under his name, a piece of land deep in the Yukon wilderness that most people had written off decades ago. It was called the Ridge Claim, a place forgotten by history and feared by locals. On paper, it was worthless. Old mining reports said it was nothing but rock, gravel, and frozen mud. Several miners had tried their luck there 50 years earlier and walked away empty-handed. The ground was unstable, the permafrost moved like a living thing, and the few who worked there claimed that the land itself swallowed their machines. But Parker saw something no one else did. He wasn't chasing profit this time, he was chasing the truth. He had grown up hearing stories from his grandfather, the legendary John Schnabel, about hidden pockets of untouched ground, old gold transport routes, and secret deposits lost to time. Most of those stories had faded as family tales, but Parker had always believed there was more to them. When he came across an old survey file with his grandfather's handwriting on it, he stopped in his tracks. The coordinates were marked in faded pencil, the location labeled simply as Ridge Sector C. That spot, as it turned out, matched perfectly with the abandoned claim no one had touched in half a century. That was enough for Parker. He packed a single loader, one wash plant, a generator, and headed out alone into the Yukon cold. Locals warned him not to go. They said the place was cursed. One old prospector told him the last man who mined there vanished before finishing the season. His camp was found torn apart by the frost, his equipment buried under collapsed ground. No one knew what happened. The story went that the permafrost there moved at night, shifting like waves under the soil. But Parker didn't believe in curses or legends. He knew that the toughest jobs often had the best payoffs. Didn't believe in ghost stories. He believed in evidence. He arrived on the claim quietly, setting up a small camp near the frozen airstrip. There were no film crews, no interviews, and no fancy setups. This was a one-man mission. He wasn't here to entertain anyone. He was here to find what his grandfather couldn't. The first few days were brutal. The ground was harder than concrete. The cold cut through his gloves, and the machines froze almost every morning. Still, he worked from dawn until night, chipping away at the stubborn earth. Then, on the fifth morning, a small prop plane flew low over the ridge and dropped a sealed envelope onto the airstrip beside his loader. No markings, no sender, nothing. Just a yellowed paper inside, folded once and sealed with tape. Parker opened it carefully, his hands shaking from the cold. Inside were coordinates, written in looping handwriting, the same unmistakable script of his grandfather, John Schnabel. Beneath the coordinates was a single line, "For the one who still believes." Parker stood in the freezing wind, staring at those words. The coordinates pointed to a section of land deeper into the ridge, a spot so remote it wasn't even marked on current mining maps. That was enough. He loaded up, packed fuel and food, and moved his operation. This wasn't just another dig now. This was a message from the past. For days, he drilled through ice and gravel, finding nothing but frost and frustration. The engines froze, the drill heads snapped, and still he refused to quit. He slept in the cab of his truck some nights just to save time. On the seventh day, the excavator struck something hard. It wasn't rock. The sound was hollow, almost metallic. Parker jumped down, brushed away the frost, and uncovered a weathered wooden stake driven deep into the ground. On it were faint, hand-carved letters, J. Schnabel, 1979.
Beneath the stake was a small rusted tin tube. Parker pried it open with a chisel, and out slid a brittle sheet of folded paper. It was half of a mining ledger. The handwriting matched his grandfather's exactly. At the top were two names, J. Schnabel and another set of initials, R.W. The paper was dated 1979, the same year his grandfather abruptly stopped one of his last Yukon projects and refused to talk about it again. For Parker, that moment changed everything. His grandfather hadn't just been mining here, he had been hiding something.
His mechanic, the only other person he'd called for backup, found something strange buried behind a pile of old drill heads, an unmarked wooden box wrapped in oil paper. Inside was a geological core sample tube, labeled with the same coordinates and date, 1979. Attached to it was a yellowing analysis sheet stamped "Property of Yukon Mineral Survey Company." The company hadn't existed for over 40 years. The results were shocking. Gold concentration spiked below 60 feet, and at the bottom of the sheet, one word, stamped in red ink, "Classified." That was all Parker needed to see. Someone had found something huge here long ago, and someone else had buried it, both literally and officially. He waited for the sun to dip below the ridge, started his excavator, and began digging deeper than any permit allowed. The machine roared against the ice, steel teeth tearing into layers of frozen soil that hadn't been touched for half a century. Then it happened. A sound that froze his blood. The ground moaned, deep and heavy, and then gave way. The excavator dropped into a collapsing pit, throwing Parker to the frozen ground. A wave of gravel and ice swallowed half the machine. For a few seconds, he couldn't breathe. When the dust settled, he saw something sticking out of the broken wall, thick wooden beams, hand-cut and blackened with age. It wasn't natural. It was a tunnel. Parker's heart pounded as he crawled closer. He ran his glove along the edge, smooth, shaped, reinforced. No record had ever shown tunnels in this claim. He checked the archives. There was nothing. And yet here it was, perfectly built, hidden under the earth for nearly a century. He grabbed his headlamp, strapped his camera to his chest, and climbed through the twisted wreckage into the tunnel. The air was stale and cold. Frost hung like cobwebs from the beams, and every step echoed in the silence. The deeper he went, the colder it became, until his breath turned to thick mist in front of him. After a long stretch, the tunnel ended abruptly in a solid wall. But when he looked closer, it wasn't a wall at all. It was a door. A circular metal door sealed into the stone, rimmed with rusted bolts, half buried under ice. Parker brushed the frost away and read the faint engraving, "Klondike Transport Company, 1912. He froze. The Klondike Transport Company wasn't just any mining outfit. They were the official carriers of gold shipments during the early Yukon gold rush. Every bar mined in Alaska or the Klondike passed through their hands on its way to the Alaska Mint. Historical records said the company went bankrupt in 1913 after several shipments disappeared without trace. Parker knew exactly what this meant. If this door was real, it could be one of those missing vaults. He grabbed a steel rod and hammered against the frozen seam until the bolts cracked and the door creaked open. The rush of air that escaped was like breathing history itself, dry, metallic, ancient. He swung his light inside and gasped. The room was filled with wooden crates stacked to the ceiling, each one stamped with serial numbers and sealed with wax. The frost on the floor sparkled golden in the light. Parker stepped forward, pried open the nearest crate, and stopped. Inside were gold bars, dozens of them, neatly aligned, stamped "Property of Alaska Mint." Their edges were worn, their seals cracked, but the shine was unmistakable. He turned off his camera. Whatever this was, it wasn't meant to be found. In that moment, Parker realized he wasn't standing in a mine anymore. He was standing inside a forgotten vault, sealed since before World War I. He stood there in silence, just listening to the soft groan of the timbers and the slow drip of frost. Then something caught his eye. A small metal box buried beneath one of the crates. It wasn't wood, it was steel, sealed with rusted matches. He pulled it free and pried it open. Inside was a black leather notebook, the pages yellowed but intact. On the first page, in neat handwriting, was his grandfather's name, John Schnabel. Below it, those same unknown initials, R.W. Parker's breath caught. The notebook's early pages read like shipping records, lists of weights and serial codes from 1911 to 1912. But halfway through, the handwriting changed. It became tense, secretive. Phrases like diverted reserves and temporary concealment appeared again and again. Then one line stopped him cold. In agreement to conceal reserves until transport resumes. The next entry wasn't in his grandfather's hand. It read, "Keep this sealed, return when the war ends." Parker turned the last page carefully. The ink was smudged, but readable. Shipment B-17 relocated to secondary vault under Ridge Sector C. Signed again, J. Schnabel. He realized what it meant. His grandfather hadn't just found this place, he had helped seal it. Parker stood frozen, staring at the notebook in his hands. The weight of what he had uncovered settled on him like the fit
Was almost too much to bear. He had found gold. Not just any gold, but a government shipment hidden for over a century. And the handwriting of his grandfather confirmed it all. This was no ordinary dig. This was history itself, locked away in the frozen Yukon, waiting for someone who dared to follow the old maps. He took a deep breath, looking around the vault. The gold bars, stacked neatly in their crates, reflected the dim light like little suns trapped under frost. Each bar bore the stamp of the Alaska Mint. These weren't mined for profit. These were official reserves, meant to be counted, guarded, and stored. Someone had deliberately hidden them, and Parker knew that if word of this got out, it could change the history books. He examined the smaller steel box he had found. It wasn't heavy, but it felt important. Inside, the notebook revealed secrets about shipment B-17, a shipment that had vanished decades ago. Parker understood that the initials R.W. belonged to another prospector or official, someone who had worked with his grandfather to hide the gold during a time of crisis. But who? That question would remain unanswered for now. Time was slipping away, and Parker knew he had to be careful. The tunnel was deep, the structure old, and the frost could collapse it at any moment. He carefully packed the notebook and one of the smaller gold bars into his jacket and made his way back toward the tunnel entrance. Each step was deliberate, every sound echoing through the frozen shaft. He reached the daylight and was hit by the cold air like a wall. Parker climbed back into his truck and surveyed the site. Everything seemed quiet, but the Yukon had a way of keeping secrets. He knew that what he had uncovered was dangerous knowledge, not just for the gold, but for the story behind it, a story governments might not want told, about lost shipments, hidden vaults, and a century-old secret that had never been solved. He spent the next hours carefully documenting the coordinates, photographing the crates, and labeling his notes. But he didn't leave tracks. Every step was measured to ensure no one would follow. Parker wasn't looking for fame or headlines. This was about discovery, history, and honoring the work of his grandfather. As night fell, Parker set up floodlights around the claim. He needed to dig deeper to confirm that the vault was intact. There were no other chambers. The wind howled across the ridge, and the frost bit through his gloves, but he worked methodically. Hours passed with a machine cutting through layers of ice and frozen mud. Every now and then, he would pause and check his old survey maps, comparing the original ledger to the ground beneath his feet. Suddenly, the excavator struck something hard again. Parker jumped down and examined the ground. Another layer of timbers hidden beneath frost and soil. His heart raced. Could there be another chamber, a second vault connected to the main one? He quickly cleared the area, brushing away debris. It looked like the wood had been reinforced, just like the first tunnel. Without hesitation, Parker climbed back into the tunnel, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. Frost formed on his beard, his gloves were stiff, and every breath came out in thick white clouds. The tunnel stretched far, the walls lined with wooden supports. Parker's heart pounded in his chest as he moved further, scanning for any sign of another hidden chamber. Finally, he reached the end. It was smaller than the first vault, but equally intriguing. A single reinforced crate sat against the wall. Parker knelt beside it, brushing off decades of frost and dust. The crate was unmarked, no stamps, no serial numbers, nothing to identify it. He pried the lid open carefully, fearing what he might find. Inside were small linen pouches, sealed with faded red wax. The labels were faint but readable. Shipment B-17. Parker's pulse quickened. This was the same shipment mentioned in the ledger and notebook. He lifted one pouch and tipped a small amount of its contents into his gloved hand. Gold dust. Clean, refined, and unmistakably valuable. This wasn't raw placer gold from a creek. This was finished, mint-quality gold, ready for transport. He carefully counted the pouches, dozens of them. Each weighed between 30 and 40 ounces. Together, the stash easily exceeded $45 million at today's market value. Parker's breath caught. For over a century, this treasure had lain hidden, forgotten, buried under permafrost, and now he had found it. But Parker didn't rush to celebrate. He knew the discovery came with risks. Anyone who had hidden this gold had gone to great lengths to ensure it stayed buried. That meant there might still be people watching, waiting to reclaim it. And the Yukon, with its frozen expanse and harsh conditions, could claim him just as easily as the gold. He packed the smaller crate and secured the gold dust pouches. Everything had to be moved carefully, without leaving evidence. Parker loaded the crate into the bed of his truck, covered it with a tarp, and checked his surroundings. The night was silent, except for the howl of the wind. He drove slowly back toward the main camp, mindful of every sound. Back at camp, Parker reviewed the ledger, the notebook, and his photos. He realized he now held a complete picture of the operation his grandfather had been part of. Shipment B-17 had been relocated to this ridge during a time of crisis, likely due to government directives, lost shipments, or wartime precautions. His grandfather had been tasked with overseeing it, and Parker had now completed the circle. The next morning, Parker returned to the tunnel. He wanted to confirm that the main vault was still intact. What he found shocked him. The tunnel entrance had been disturbed. Fresh soil covered the area, as if someone had tried to collapse the opening. Parker's heart sank. Someone knew he had been here. He carefully examined the ground. The soil had been moved inward, not outward, meaning whoever had done this had sealed the tunnel from the inside or closely monitored it. Parker realized he wasn't the only one aware of this site. That knowledge put him in danger, but it also confirmed the importance of what he had discovered. Parker didn't panic. He retraced his steps to the secondary vault. It was intact, the gold dust and smaller crate untouched. He knew he had to act fast. Using equipment and tools from his camp, he reinforced the area around the secondary vault and covered it with snow, leaving no trace. Then he documented the coordinates carefully, marking them for himself, but revealing nothing to outsiders. He left the area as quietly as he had arrived. The ridge, once a site of mystery and danger, was now safe for Parker alone. He drove down the lease road, only to encounter two trucks parked ahead. Men stepped out in reflective jackets, but there were no badges, no official identification. They claimed to be environmental inspectors checking permafrost stability. Parker asked for documents,
Showed nothing, smiled, and circled his camp, photographing everything. Parker stayed calm. He had prepared for this possibility. He hid one of the smaller gold bars in a hollow of his truck, making it impossible to detect. The inspectors spent 20 minutes on the site, then left without incident. Parker realized that even official-looking visitors could not be trusted completely. Someone, somewhere, wanted to know about this discovery. By dawn, Parker had packed up the main camp. He moved the gold dust pouches and the ledger, leaving the ridge claim appearing abandoned and unproductive. Any casual observer would think this was just another failed mining site. Only Parker knew the truth. Weeks passed. Parker returned to his base near the Indian River, quietly expanding operations at another claim. The ridge claim remained untouched, frozen beneath the Yukon snow. Locals noticed subtle changes in Parker. He didn't flaunt wealth, didn't chase headlines, and didn't return to the discovery cameras. Only a few trusted people knew what had happened. Months later, Rick Ness, flying overhead on a supply run, noticed a glint in the snow near the abandoned camp. He landed and found a frozen chest rig camera, one of Parker's. The memory card was mostly damaged, but one clip played. It showed Parker deep inside the tunnel, placing a support beam and standing before the gold vault. In a low, tired voice, he said, "He finished it, Granddad." Rick replayed the footage over and over, realizing Parker had completed the work his grandfather started decades ago. The vault, the gold, the ledger, the notebook, everything had been preserved, hidden, and now rediscovered. The next day, the tunnel entrance at the ridge claim was sealed by Yukon authorities, marked as a restricted geological hazard. No one was allowed within 5 kilometers. The gold remained hidden, protected by frost, time, and secrecy. Despite the secrecy, Parker continued to honor his grandfather's legacy. He anonymously donated to Dawson City's old mining museum, helping restore artifacts and preserve the history of the Klondike Gold Rush. Among the donations was a restored core sample tube marked with the serial from the classified Yukon report, a silent confirmation of his discovery. The museum unveiled a new wing displaying historical documents and artifacts, including a ledger signed J. Schnabel. The last page, mentioning shipment B-17, was missing. Visitors could see the weight and coordinates of past discoveries, but the most important secret remained hidden under the ridge, frozen and untouched. Parker's solo dig had uncovered a $45 million jackpot, but he never flaunted it. He returned to his operations quietly, carrying the knowledge and legacy of a century-old secret. He knew some treasures were meant to be discovered, but not all were meant to be revealed. The Yukon wind carried across the valley, whispering through the spruce forests, keeping the secret of the ridge claim. Parker Schnabel had not just found gold, he had completed a family legacy, preserved history, and uncovered a secret that had survived wars, governments, and generations. And somewhere beneath the frozen earth, the main vault, sealed and protected, awaited the next chapter of the story. Parker had learned that some discoveries weren't just about wealth. They were about understanding the past, honoring family, and guarding secrets that time itself had tried to bury. Parker sat in his truck, the Yukon wind whipping around the edges of his camp. He stared at the maps, the ledger, and the gold dust pouches carefully packed in the bed. Every step he had taken so far had been deliberate. Every movement had been calculated to ensure that no one would follow his trail. He knew that once the story of shipment B-17 got out, it would create a ripple of chaos. Prospectors, collectors, historians, and even government agencies would all be trying to stake a claim, and he couldn't risk anyone discovering the vault before he was ready. He leaned back in his seat, thinking of his grandfather. John Schnabel had risked everything to hide this treasure. His grandfather's handwriting, etched in the notebook and ledger, had guided Parker like a compass across decades. Every cryptic note, every coordinate, every sealed vault carried meaning
that only Parker could fully understand. The responsibility weighed on him. He wasn't just discovering gold, he was preserving a secret that could rewrite the history of the Yukon Gold Rush. By the